എല്ലാവർക്കും കർത്താവിന്റെ നാമത്തിൽ വന്ദനം. The history of modern India starts from 1800. By this time, almost all the strategic centers in India came completely under the control of European colonial powers. Particularly the East India Company, established in 1600, came to India and they slowly began to occupy the territories, even by conquering the colonies once acquired by Portugal, France, and even Denmark. Now the situation in India was very promising for the British East India Company. We know that India was ruled by hundreds of small kings and their kingdoms who were constantly at warfare. Now that situation helped the British, the East India Company, to take control of the situation by subduing them, bringing them under their control. Particularly Bombay, Calcutta, and Madras became three presidencies of the British East India Company, and from these three centers, they began to take control of almost all of the parts of our country, India. During that same time, in the southern part of India, the kingdom of Mysore, under the leadership of Hyder Ali and his son Tipu Sultan, that became more powerful and they wanted to conquer the entire South India. So they slowly began their warfare and they began to proceed towards the south. Mangalore area, the whole of Malabar, they came even up to Thrissur area in Kerala. All these places were brought under their control. Now, from there, they further wanted to move towards the south and conquer Travancore and Kochi. Now, wherever Tipu went, he got victory and he was able to bring those places under his control. And the kings of both Kochi and Travancore realized that if Tipu comes, he will have the victory and they have to surrender before him. To escape from that, both the kings of Kochi and Travancore decided to come in contact with the British East India Company who were stationed in Madras, requesting them to come and help them to fight against Tipu. A treaty was made between the East India Company and these two kings, and they agreed to pay tax to the British East India Company, and the East India Company decided to appoint an officer to take charge of the administration both in Travancore and Kochi. As a result of that agreement was accorded, finally the East India Company, the British troops began to have a fighting with Tipu Sultan at Srirangapattanam around 1792, where Tipu was totally defeated. All the places conquered by Tipu also directly came under the Madras Presidency, the British East India Company. That means the entire Malabar came completely under the East India Company, and Malabar was directly ruled by the East India Company. Kochi and Travancore entered into an agreement with the East India Company, and they appointed a person. That office was known by the name resident. And they began to check, control the administration of these two places. We can say the steering, the bit and bridle, everything was with the Diwan, the resident. Now from 1800 onwards, both Kerala and Kochi also came under the British rule. The kings, their kingdom, their dynasty continued to rule, but the final word was as that of the British East India Company. Malabar was directly ruled by them also. So 1800 onwards, East India Company decided to appoint one person as the resident, both of Travancore and Kochi. And the first person was Colonel Colin Macaulay, who was a Protestant Christian, an evangelical Christian, and also he was much interested in Christianity, particularly the Christians living in Malabar. So when he assumed the office and came to Kerala, he saw the tragic situation of the Christian community in Malabar. They were divided among themselves under different groups. Politically, they were marginalized. There was no social privileges for them. So many hardships they began to undergo. Many restrictions were on them. Many laborious duties were laid upon them. So the church in Malabar, Christians in Malabar, were having a very tragic situation during those days. So therefore, Macaulay, by using his office, he wanted to help the Christians in Malabar. So he began one by one. First, he abolished the poll tax, payment of poll tax to the government. So he abolished that particular system. Then he also decided to stop the several duties that was on the part of Christian community, particularly related to the temples, supplying oil, supplying rice to the temple. So such laborious duties also were stopped by Macaulay. So he wanted to somehow help the St. Thomas Christians in Malabar. So from 1800 to 1810, he was in control of the situation. From 1810 to 1819, the second resident, the most outstanding personality, Colonel John Munro, he was appointed as a resident. Now he came to Travancore, and the blessing for Munro was when he came to Travancore, in the royal family there was no male heir to rule over. Two sisters, Rani Lakshmi Pai and Parvati Pai, they were the rulers of Travancore kingdom. Because of these women, they had several limitations. So they completely depended on Munro, and Munro was very capable also to handle all the administrative structures in Travancore and Kochi. Now Munro also was a very good, committed Christian who was interested in the St. Thomas Christians and also making Christianity or bringing them to the leading role of the Kerala society, and also he wanted to do some evangelistic activities in and around Malabar. So he began to request the Rani Lakshmi Pai and Parvati Pai to help the Christian community in Malabar by granting them certain social privileges and status, removing all the laws and rules against the Christian community. So by using his authority, he began to redress the grievances of the St. Thomas community in Malabar, whether they belong to any denomination, whether Catholic or Eastern, whether it is Orthodox group or Jacobite group, whatever it was, they were interested in that. Now it was during this time, during the time of Macaulay, one of the Anglican bishop, I just made a mention earlier also, Claudius Buchanan, he visited India, particularly to Calcutta and Madras. Then he also came to Travancore, where he was able to meet the leaders of the churches. Then the head of the Orthodox Church in Malabar, he met this bishop, Claudius Buchanan, and requested him to make God's word available in Malayalam language. So he took the initiative with the help of one person by name Philippos Ramban. From Syriac language, the Gospels were translated into Malayalam. Since printing was not available, he took those manuscripts to Mumbai, where it was printed and sent it back to Kerala. This was around 1811. His visit was in 1807, and the printing of the Bible was in 1811. When he returned to England, he wrote a book which became very famous in England, Christian Researches in Asia, where he wrote all that he saw in India, in Malabar. So that made the people in England to have an idea about India, the people in India, their religious faith, the state of affairs of the Christian community. The people in England, they began to know. So that created an interest among the people in England. That was the reason why missionary activity began between England and Malabar. It was during this time, in around 1813, the Orthodox Church approached Monroe with a request that to start a seminary, they were in need of the kingdom of Travancore because the land belonged to the government. So Monroe took this as an important issue, approached the royal family, Lakshmi Bhai and Parvati Bhai, and requested them to grant land necessary for building the seminary. On the request of Monroe, 33 acres of land was allotted by the royal family on the banks of Meenachal River in Kottayam, where the first seminary in Kottayam was established. That is still in existence. That is the Orthodox Theological Seminary in Kottayam. The seminary was started in 1814. Classes started. But there were not many people to teach. Only few Malpans who were well versed in Syriac language, they were teaching in the seminary. So Monroe thought, this is the golden opportunity to help St. Thomas Christians by bringing some missionaries from England to Malabar so that they can teach in the seminary, they can translate the Bible. So Monroe, he wrote letters to the newly started missionary organization, an Anglican organization in England known by the name the Church Missionary Society, the CMS. On the request of John Monroe, in 1816, the first missionary came to Malabar. He was Thomas Norton. Now he wanted to move to Alappuzha area to start some schools, started few churches there. He began to share the gospel with the people in the locality, and many converts also began to come forward. So Norton settled down in Alappuzha and he continued his ministry. But the seminary was in Kottayam. Monroe wanted someone to teach in the seminary. That purpose was not fulfilled. Again, Monroe began to write letters. On the basis of those letters, 3 more missionaries were sent by the CMS to Kottayam. They are known as the Kottayam Trio: Benjamin Bailey, Henry Baker, and Joseph Fenn. These 3 missionaries were sent by the CMS. They came in 1817 and in 1818. They reached Kottayam. Benjamin Bailey was interested in literary activities. He began to learn the language Malayalam. And the first priority was to translate Bible into Malayalam language. He began the work, I already said. Around 1829, the New Testament was printed and published. And by 1845, the full Bible was printed and published in Malayalam. Apart from the Bible, they began to translate several hymns into Malayalam language. The Anglican liturgy, the Book of Common Prayer, prayers. Then they also began to involve in compilation of dictionaries, grammar books in Malayalam language. So that was one of the area Benjamin Bailey began to follow, and he was very successful in that area. Henry Baker was a teacher by profession. So he began to give priority to providing, imparting education to the people in India. So the first school started by the missionaries was the Baker Memorial Higher Secondary School in the heart of the city of Kottayam. From there, several other schools were started in and around Kottayam area. Several schools were started by Henry Baker and his family, and preaching of the gospel was undertaken by all these missionaries, and they were able to establish several churches also. Along with the church, they also started a school. So this was another area of their activity that continued. And Josephine, he was appointed as the principal of the seminary started by the Orthodox seminary with the help of Colonel John Munro. Now, Josephine, he slowly wanted to introduce the Protestant teaching in the seminary. But they were strictly instructed that they should not break down the ancient walls of Malabar Christianity. And the very purpose of their arrival was mainly to help the St. Thomas Christians in Malabar. Therefore, that mission was usually known as the Mission of Help. The CMS missionary organization wanted to help the St. Thomas Christians in Malabar. But they never wanted to convert the St. Thomas Christians to Protestant Christianity immediately. So they did not get into a struggle with Eastern Christianity, the Orthodox Christianity. Rather, he gave the leadership to the seminary. He also began to teach in the seminary. Malayalam also was taught, the different languages were taught, then mathematics, history, sociology, everything. They began to teach in the seminary, so the work of the seminary slowly began to improve and develop. The candidates who came out of the seminary were ordained and they were sent to different churches. And when they were appointed in the churches, they also began to read the Bible. They began to teach and preach from the Bible. So in the churches also, there began some changes as a result of the involvement of the CMS missionaries, Protestant missionaries. But none of them joined Protestantism, or they did not accept the faith of the Anglican community. In between, there were certain struggles also we can find. There was an occasion by 1818, the church made some reservations against the teachings of the Protestant missionaries, and they wanted to take one step back from the connection with the CMS missionaries. But in spite of that, many other discussions were there. The relationship continued till 1836. By 1836, between that 20 years' time, the mission of help was very successful. All over Kerala, the people were able to have a copy of the Bible. Songs were translated and composed by the missionaries. They were able to sing these songs, involved in prayer meetings, reading of the Bible, hearing preachings from the church. So that began to give rise to a spiritual awakenings, revival within the St. Thomas Christian community. But by 1836, the Orthodox Church realized the danger. If this situation continues, the people will probably accept Protestantism and they will also become part of the Anglican Church. So, in 1836, a synod was convened in Mavelikara and the church decided to break the connection with the Anglican missionaries and the Anglican Church. So the mission of help organized by the CMS in 1818 came to an end by 1836. But within that 20 years' time, so much changes began to take place among the St. Thomas Christian community. Now by 1836, when the relationship came to an end, we can find three groups of Christians in Malabar, particularly in the Eastern tradition. The first group, the Orthodox Church, they said goodbye. They said, we don't want any of your influence. We don't want your teaching. We want to remain faithful to our Eastern tradition. So we are saying goodbye to you. It's enough. Thank you for helping us for the past 20 years, but we do not want to continue with you. So they broke the connection. But there was another small group who wholeheartedly accepted the teachings of the CMS missionaries, and they were ready to join with the Anglican Church. And the third group was, they did not want to leave the Eastern tradition, but at the same time, they wanted to remove all the unscriptural practices and teaching in the Eastern tradition, and they wanted to accept the Bible and its teaching. They never wanted to join Protestantism. They never wanted to become a part of the Anglican community also. The leader of this group was the famous person Abraham Malpan, who came to be known as the Martin Luther of Malankara. So from 1836, under the leadership of Abraham Malpan, a group of people joined with him. They never wanted to leave the Eastern traditions, but at the same time, they wanted to follow the Bible. They wanted to get rid of all the unscriptural practices. Even idol worship was a practice during those days in the Orthodox Church. So Abraham Malpan and his group took a strong decision, and they decided to move ahead, removing all unscriptural practices. The idols kept in the churches were taken by them, and they threw it into the river. He was from Maraman area, belonging to the Palakunnathu family. So he gave leadership to a reformation in Malabar, in Malankara, in Travancore, and that's why we call it as the Malankara Reformation, and Abraham Malpan as Martin Luther of Malankara. Now this Reformation activity initiated by Abraham Malpan continued for several years. They began to give more priority to Bible, the teachings of God's word. They began to give importance to singing, prayer meetings. So there began a new movement, which officially, after a short period, became the famous Marthoma Syrian Church. The beginning of the Marthoma Church we can trace from 1836 onwards, but officially the registration, everything was happened around 1888, 1889. The Marthoma Evangelistic Association also was started in 1888. Under the leadership of the Evangelistic Association, from 1895 onwards, the famous Maraman Convention started, first in Aramula, Aratuvida, then shifted to Maraman. Now this year in 2020, they celebrated 125th year of their Maraman Convention. So Marthoma Church became a strong, powerful Christian denomination in Malabar. Not only in Malabar, wherever people from Kerala migrated, everywhere the Marthoma Church began to spread very fast. Still, they continue that attitude, a synthesis of Eastern tradition and Protestant Christianity. They did not join completely in Protestant faith, but they synthesized the teachings of Protestantism and also the traditions of the Eastern Christian community. The Anglican, the missionaries after 1836, as I said, the mission of help came to an end. And the Orthodox Church, they said, we do not want your help anymore. So missionaries slowly began to turn to the other side. They began to give importance in preaching the gospel and converting the people to Christian faith. The St. Thomas Christians said, we do not want your help. So they began to focus particularly among the weaker sections of the society in Travancore. He began to visit those places. They began to preach the gospel to them. And slowly some of the people of the backward communities began to come forward. They were baptized and they also began to join with the missionaries, or we can say they also became part of the Anglican Church. Few Christians from Syrian background also joined with them. One of the important person was Reverend George Martin from Mallapalli area. Now he too supported the missionaries and he too joined with them. He and his congregation joined with the Anglican Church. Many others slowly began to come to the Anglican faith. In Mallapalli still, there is a hospital under the name George Martin Memorial Hospital. Then in Mallapalli, that surroundings, the missionaries began to travel and they began to share the gospel. Mass conversion began from the backward communities towards Christian faith, because the social situation in Malabar was such during those days. The weaker section society, they had no privileges, there had no freedom to walk on public road, no freedom to draw water from a public well, no freedom to build a strong house, no freedom to wear proper clothing. So several restrictions were influenced on the weaker sections of society. So when missionaries came and they slowly began to move with them, they slowly were attracted towards Christianity and they slowly began to move towards the Anglican faith. One incident I can show you. Joseph Pete, an Anglican missionary who came after the arrival of Benjamin Bailey and others, he traveled around Mallapalli area around 1837. One day as he was going for preaching the gospel and sharing the gospel with the people with the help of several others, as they were walking through the road, he saw a man from the weaker society was yoked with a bullock to plow the field. Now Joseph Pete, when they saw this, he was not able to accept it. So he jumped into the paddy field, shouting to stop this procedure. He went near to that man and he released him from the yoke and brought him out. Large number of people gathered around to watch what was happening there. Now Joseph P. took this man, keeping his hands on his shoulder. He was brought out of the paddy field. His dress was changed. And once after doing this, Joseph P. was about to move from that place. This man also requested Joseph P. to take him along with him. Eventually, the entire community of which he was a member, that community decided to join Christian faith and they became part of the Anglican Church. So this was the way how Christianity, Protestant Christianity, preached by the missionaries from 1836 onwards, began to become very popular in Malabar. The Hill Aryan community living in the Western Cut, probably between Mundakayam, Yerumapra, Kumbugutri, Melagawa, Chelakumbu area. Now that community also came in contact with the missionaries. Henry Baker Jr., he visited that place, started some schools, started some churches in that area. The outcome was almost the entire community decided to accept Christian faith there in the Western Cut area. Similarly, the CMS missionaries in central Kerala, Travancore, they began to move around sharing the gospel and many began to convert to Christianity. During this time, the Salvation Army missionaries also began to come to Malabar, the Travancore area. The Sambhava community, they also began to turn to Salvation Army and they also accepted Christian faith. So in several areas, particularly among the weaker sections, mass conversions to Christianity began to take place. The Anglican Church became very strong. It began to spread. Schools were started by them. The first was the first college in Kerala, the CMS College at Kottayam. It was started as a grammar school. Then eventually it was upgraded to as a college. Then several other colleges were established by them. Schools were started by them. The society totally began to change. Several impact. Politics slowly began to change. The society totally began to change. Many of the evil practices and social evils came to an end. And the most important thing, slavery was practiced in Travancore in the most heinous form. Human beings were treated worse than the animals. Now, in the CMS missionaries wrote several memoranda to both the kings of Travancore and Kochi, requesting them to take some measures to abolish slavery in Kerala. As a result, in 1854, slavery was officially banned in Kerala also. That also was mainly because of the missionaries and their missionary labor. Education became very common. Schools were open to both boys and girls, and also the children from the weaker sections of the society. Privileges, job opportunities, everything was provided by the missionaries to the members of the weaker sections, and that's the reason why many of them came to the church, Christianity, and they became part of the Anglican Church. The Anglican Church began to develop, and finally several other denominations also joined with them that came from England, and in 1947 that became the Church of South India, the CSI Church. The Orthodox community, who did not want the assistance of the CMS missionaries, or they never wanted to be influenced by the Protestant teaching, they continued to remain faithful to the Eastern tradition. But seminary, they got with the help of Colonel John Monroe, and the seminary continued to exist, and some influence of theological teaching that began to make some impact even among the Orthodox Christians. Some changes eventually began to take place among them also. So the arrival of the CMS missionaries to Kerala brought numerous changes. Social, political, economic, cultural, several changes began to take place in Kerala. Most important thing, education became very common. Free education, accessible to everyone. And that became one of the main reasons for all the progress, all the development that the people in Kerala even still enjoy. Usually people say that not the church, but some of the social leaders like Srinarayana Guru, then Kumaran Ashan, Dr. Palpu or Ayyangali, they were the people who introduced all these social changes in Kerala. But that's not right. Even several decades before the birth of Srinarayana Guru or any other social reformers, Kerala witnessed widespread growth of education. Srinarayana Guru, I respect that person. With all respect, I say, he was born in 1871 and died in 1921. But before his birth, several colleges, several schools were already established. Even before the birth of Ayyangali, slavery was abolished in Kerala. But these truths are always hidden, and wrong informations are projected. Okay, let them do that. But Christian influence or the missionary influence of Protestant Christianity is beyond calculation, beyond measure in Kerala. The whole society began to change. Bible became available for the people. Printing machines were brought to Kerala. Several literary activities, hundreds of books were written, dictionaries, grammar books, everything in Malayalam slowly began to come into existence. The first newspaper, magazines, the contribution of another missionary, Basil Mission missionary, Herman Gundet, we cannot forget. He made another translation of the Bible. The entire Bible was translated by Gundert into Malayalam language. And his contribution to Malayalam literature also is very important. So the missionary influence, particularly people who came from England and also from Germany, CMS, VIII Basel Evangelical Mission, and in South Kerala, the London Missionary Society. All of them, they began to work, and the outcome was the whole of Kerala began to undergo a thorough change and renaissance, and the Kerala society slowly began to change in line with the Western society. English education became common. Then at the same time in South Kerala, in Trivandrum area, Trivandrum, Nagarkovil, Kanyakumari area, the London Missionary Society sent their missionaries. William Tobias Ringle Tobe, Charles Mead, several others, they came. And they too began the same kind of activity. They settled in Trivandrum. They began schools and colleges there. They began to preach the gospel. But during the initial period, there were not much conversion. Majority of the people living in South Kerala belong to a community by name the Nadar community, who were considered as a weaker section, mainly living by toddy tapping and then other work related to palm leaves. Now this community also was undergoing several stringencies. Their women were not allowed to wear a jacket. The high caste, they did not permit the Nadar women to wear a dress above their waist. But they wanted, but they were not allowed due to caste regulations. Now when missionaries came to that area, they slowly began to encourage the women to wear jacket, mainly because they said it was a matter of decency, they said. When some Nadar women wanted to come to the church on Sunday, the missionaries requested them to buy a jacket, wearing this jacket to come to the church to participate in the worship service. Few Nadar women, they bought jackets. By wearing these jackets, they marched to the church to attend the worship service. Next day, when they went to the Marthandam market, the members of the upper caste stood by the roadside, stopped these women, and they tore the jackets that they were wearing. This initiated a rebellion in South Kerala, which came to be known as the Upper Cloth Rebellion, Melmund Samaram, which continued for about 20 years. That means this community fought for the right of wearing proper cloth for about 20 years in South Kerala. And around 1859, the judge in Nagarkovil court also was a British, a Christian, and he was the one who brought an order permitting the Nadar women to wear upper cloth. And this permission given by the judge of the Nagarkot High Court, with the help of the missionaries, that led to a mass conversion of these members of the Nadar community to Christian faith. Thousands of Nadar community members, they decided to join Christian faith and they became part of the Anglican Church. Majority turned to Christianity just because their social aspirations were met by the Christian missionaries. So that was the reason why South Kerala became a stronghold of Christianity, particularly of the Anglican Church earlier and now the CSI. Then one more thing I just wanted to point out. Look at all the main towns in Kerala. Say Thiruvananthapuram. The heart of the city is the LMS compound, where the missionaries lived. From that LMS compound, the city slowly began to develop. Similarly, Kollam, Kottayam, almost all the towns in Kerala are the places once the missionaries lived, and from there, the township slowly began to develop, and all these developments began to take place. So that was the influence, that was the impact of the missionaries in Travancore, not only in Travancore, in India and all over the world, wherever they went and started the missionary work. So CMS came to Central Travancore and LMS came to South Travancore. And in the North Malabar, once under the control of different kings, conquered by Tipu, and from him, the British East India Company conquered it, and it was directly governed by the British East India Company. Now to Malabar area, a German missionary organization, the Basel Evangelical Mission, they slowly began to send their missionaries. Samuel Habig was one of the prominent missionary who came to Malabar area, Kannur, Kozhikode, Mangalapuram area. He began to travel around, preaching the gospel. Not much conversions took place. There was no mass movement in Malabar because weaker sections were very less in Malabar area. Conversions, of course, continued. Churches were built. Schools and colleges were established by the BA missionaries from Thrissur towards Mangalore, Mangalapuram area. Then they also started several industries in Malabar area, mainly to help the people to have a livelihood. Roofing tiles, factories was very common in Malabar area, started by them. Then leather industries also were established by them. Then various training institutions for vocational training also was started by the Basel Evangelical Mission missionaries. So conversions, not as we see in South Kerala or Central Kerala, but comparatively very less in number in Malabar. But Christianity began to flourish. Almost all the cities, including Kozhikode, Thalassery, Kannur, everywhere they made a strong presence and many began to turn to Christian faith in Malabar area also. So altogether, in the 19th century, Protestant faith became the major faith in Kerala. The St. Thomas Christians, as we said earlier, majority accepted Roman Catholic faith during the Synod of Diamber and they remained faithful to the Catholic Church. The Eastern community was divided into two groups, the Antiochian affiliation and the Persian allegiance. Then the third group we have the Protestant Christianity. And in between we have the Marthoma Church, not leaving the Eastern tradition, but not purely accepting the Protestant faith also. And Protestant Christianity also eventually slowly began to divide. The Marthoma Church, the Reformation that started under the leadership of Abraham Alpan, that continued. As it continued, the Marthoma Church came into existence. They had a framework of their own. And they never wanted to go beyond that limit. But there was a group of people who wanted to go further, accepting the teachings of the Bible. And a group came out of the Marthoma Church, and that group came to be known as the Evangelical Church. In Malayalam, we used to say earlier, Pathyakara, the St. Thomas Evangelical Church. One step ahead of the Marthoma understanding of Christian faith. So again, that spirit of revival, the spirit of knowing God's word more and more, that still continued, and that resulted in the formation of several other revival movements from the second half of the 19th century, carried on to the beginning of the 20th century. When we had a discussion on the Pentecostal movement and its origin, I said several evangelists, they began to visit during this time. John Arulapan, Wordsworth, Walker Sahib, several others began to come. During their arrival and the preaching of the gospel, some outstanding prominent people from Kerala belonging to high caste Hindu families, they also accepted Christian faith. Justice Joseph, usually known as Vidwan Kuti, is the best example. He, along with his brothers, having much background in traditional Carnatic music, highly talented, they accepted Christianity, became part of the Anglican Church, and Justice Joseph was ordained as a priest in the Anglican Church also. But sad to say that he went beyond the borders, excessive and steps he began to take. He was associated with few prophets, and there was a prophecy that Christ will come, the second coming of Christ will take place in 1886, and they began to prepare for that. Then by 1886, that did not happen. Then many of them left that group, and that Vidwan Gutti and the group eventually came to be known as the Yuyomayam, a heretical group. But the revival, the spirit of revival began to sweep across. The brethren missionaries slowly began to come. Noel, Nagel, many others began to come. And that teaching began to attract many from Kerala. K.V. Simon Sir and others. Then again there was further reforms among them. K.V. Simon Sir and a group of people gave leadership to another movement known by the name Viyojita Prasthanam. Many began to join with them and support them. That spirit again continued. And by the turn of the 20th century, the Pentecostal missionaries slowly began to come, and Pentecostalism also began to begin from 1813-14 onwards in Kerala. Why I said this is, the CMS, LMS, Basel Evangelical Mission missionaries came to Kerala, and they began to teach God's word to the people in Kerala. They began to conduct worship service in Malayalam. Preaching became common. They began to meet together. They began to sing songs and spend time in prayer. So these phenomena began to make much impact in the Kerala society. Though the Orthodox Church took a decision that they do not need the help of the CMS missionaries in 1836, to a certain extent, that community also was influenced by the CMS missionaries. The whole society began to change. The church began to change. Education began to change. Economic development slowly began. The community began to change. Everywhere, changes began to take place one after the other as a result of the arrival of Protestant Christian faith, particularly brought by the CMS and LMS BEM missionaries. Now the Anglican Church, what happened to them later? The Anglican Church continued under the leadership of the Church of England, having the headquarters in Canterbury in England. All the bishops and priests in Kerala or everywhere were appointed by the Archbishop of Canterbury from England. But in the 20th century, there began a desire. It is not good to stay divided. So several denominations began to express the desire and the need for the unity among the Christian community. Particularly in a context like India, where Christians are only a minority, they wanted to unite. if possible, to bring all Christians together. So several attempts began. As a result of various discussions, planning, and much prayer, it was decided 5 different denominations. The Anglican Church was the main group, followed by the Basel Mission. Then the Presbyterian Church, again another denomination from England. Then the congregational churches, again another denomination that came from England. And also a group of Methodist churches, again they also came from England. These 5 denominations in South India, they decided to agree, join together, forgetting all the differences in their teaching, traditions, practices, episcopacy or non-episcopacy. They wanted to unite beyond all these differences. From 1900 onwards, discussions began. Several major steps we can find. In 1919, there was an important meeting of the representatives of all these 5 denominations. And finally, they agreed to join together. But there were many hurdles because all these 5 denominations had different doctrines, different practices. Some of them were episcopal and some of them were non-episcopal. But in spite of that, there was a thriving desire that the church should be one. If we want to survive, or if we want to have a meaningful witness in our country, we should unite. That was a desire that motivated these people. As a result, they were ready to sacrifice their own isms, accept one another, and as a result, in 1947, all these 5 denominations decided to lose their identity and they merged together as one denomination. And that is the Church of South India, the CSI Church. So the CSI today, as we see, is an association of 5 different denominations before 1947. But from 1947, only one group, that is the Church of South India. All the issues that they faced were solved by 1970. And the church became purely episcopal in nature. And still they continue their journey as members of the CSI Church. So just a flashback into the denominations in Kerala now. Some of them already we have discussed. The Catholic community. The St. Thomas Christians from Eastern tradition, during the time of the Synod of Dimber in 1599, they decided to embrace Roman Catholic faith. And they are the present Syro-Malabar tradition or the Syrian Catholics. The second group in the Roman Catholics in Kerala is the Latin Catholic Rite. They are the products of the missionary work undertaken by the Portuguese missionaries, particularly from the weaker sections, Mukwa community. They use Latin as the ecclesiastical language, and the Syriac Catholics, they use Syriac as their ecclesiastical language. Then again we have the third family, the Malangara Catholic Rite. In 1930, a bishop by name Mar Ivanios from the Orthodox Church, along with a group of people, they left the Orthodox faith and they joined in the Roman Catholic faith. And that community is known as the Malangara Catholic community. Then of course there is a Kananaya Catholic community also. Then the Eastern community, there are several families among them. Number 1, the traditional, the original, having the association with the Persian Church or the present Indian Orthodox Church. Then the second family is the Jacobite Syrian Church, having their allegiance to the patriarch in Antioch. Then there is a third family in the Eastern tradition, having Thrissur as their headquarters. The Chaldean Church, Chaldaya Suryani Sabha, the Chaldean Syrian Church or the Church of the East. Thrissur, and in and around Thrissur area, there are several churches. They have colleges, medical college, everything in that Thrissur area. The famous person, the bishop, Paulus Mar Paulus, was a leader of that community. Now, Bishop Mar Aprem gave the leadership for the Chaldean Syrian Church, and the headquarters is in Thrissur. Then there is a fourth family, a small family following the Eastern tradition. They are based in Kunnamkulam, Pazhanyi area, known by the name the Annur Church, A-N-J-O-O, or Annur Church. Nearly 20-25 churches, several schools are there in that area. That also is a part of the Eastern family. So mainly, 4 families are there in Kerala having their Eastern traditions. Then Marthoma Church, of course, as we said, is a mixture of Eastern tradition and Protestantism. Then coming to Protestantism, we have the Anglican Church mainly, all present the CSI. The CSI also around 1970 was divided into 2 groups, because there was a clash between the Syrian members of the Syrian background and the members from the weaker sections in the CSI church. And that resulted in a division. And the members of the weaker sections, majority of them, left the CSI church, but they follow the Anglican tradition. They left the CSI, the label, and now they are known as the Anglican Church, Bishop Vattapara and others. The Anglican Church. Then we have the other evangelical communities, the Baptist churches, the Brethren churches. Then of course we have the Evangelical Church. Then again the Pentecostal community, having several groups and families within them. Then Salvation Army, of course. Their work also is mainly concentrated among the weaker sections of the society. They are also they have a powerful presence in different parts of Kerala. So these are some of the major dominant Christian denominations and communities in Kerala at present. At present, we have around 22 to 24% of the total population of Kerala. The Christian community is not a big group. Remember, Christianity came in the 1st century, and down through these 20 centuries, we could attain only the growth of about 22 to 24%. That is, of course, the mistake, the failure of the St. Thomas Christian community, who claims much. But we were not able to fulfill our responsibility in sharing the gospel to the people around us. Till the arrival of the missionaries in the modern period, the St. Thomas Christians never shared the gospel with the person living to the next door. That was not at all in their agenda. If our forefathers would have undertaken that responsibility, Kerala would have been completely a Christian state today. But that did not happen, and we are responsible for that. So at least we should realize it. When we make such claims that we belong to so and so, we should also consider our basic fundamental responsibility: share the gospel with the people living around us. So this discussion, it's my prayer that should motivate all those who listen this, should take up that challenge and try to do everything possible to make Christ known to the people in our locality. Let everyone come to know about Jesus. Let everyone accept Jesus as the Savior. Let our state, and through our state, our nation, and the entire world may come to know Jesus as the Lord. Every knee should bow, every tongue should confess that Jesus is. I too pray and I too surrender even my life for this task. As we continue our journey, let the name of Jesus be glorified everywhere. So the history, a brief understanding, a bird's eye view of the church, the history of the church in Kerala, I have presented. I think it's almost clear to you, and you can further think, you can read the books, you can gather more informations, and you can keep reflecting on these issues, and let's work together for making Christ known to everyone. God bless you all.